Welcome to the Voice of Retail. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc. This podcast is brought to you in conjunction with Retail Council of Canada. Serial entrepreneur Chris Jones, founder of Cannabis Express, tells us how and why his high-quality, high-speed, and low-price model has seen him grow to more than a dozen retail stores in Ontario, despite cannabis retail industry consolidation.
We keep them very small. I'm pretty sure we also have the smallest cannabis stores in the country. So some of them are about 300 square feet with about 80 square feet of retail space. So just small locations. We optimize labor, so we only have one person working at a time. And limited.
There's a bit of risk with one person though. Like in the COVID era, we're still in the quasi post-COVID era. One person gets sick. I mean, how do you deal with the? I just diving into the operational questions, but right there, you got me thinking.
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Chris, welcome to the Voice of Retail podcast. How are you doing this afternoon?
I'm doing well, Michael. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Hey, looking forward to chit and chat. Thanks for reaching out. I think you reached out on LinkedIn and said, hey, I think you'd heard a couple of my podcasts, and we said, hey, I'd love to chat with you. And I thought it was a great opportunity to talk to an innovative retailer in the cannabis space. So welcome.
Thank you. Yeah, I was excited. I've been following your podcast and noticed you had a bunch of, or at least some cannabis retailers on. I was like, you know what? I think I have a much better, more unique business model than most of them, or all of them at least. So I figured it'd be great to get on and chat with you.
Well, let's find out. Let's get into it. Why don't we take it from the top? So tell us a little bit about who you are and a bit of your background, your journey, and how you got into the retail cannabis business, and then we'll get into talking about Cannabis Express. But first, let's talk about you.
Yeah, that sounds like a good start. My journey, I guess, is fairly unique compared to most people. I always wanted a job in cannabis, and then obviously when before cannabis legalization in Canada, most of the jobs here were focused on cultivation, which obviously isn't something I'm that interested in. So I've had a variety of jobs over the years, working at a law firm, 2 large construction companies, and then when I was finishing my MBA. I saw a job posted for a cannabis M&A company, public company based out of Toronto. So I applied for that job, got it. I was there for close to 3 years. The focus of the company was M&A in California in particular. So this was pre-legalization in Canada. And obviously at that point in time, California passed legislation, so they had recreational rules, and they had a robust medical system previously, so the infrastructure was already, set up in that state to be fairly successful. So we bought 6 companies in California, invested in a handful. I traveled pretty frequently to California to look at M&A opportunities, and then obviously working on closing the transactions and the integration of that business into our ecosystem. So it was an interesting insight into, a more mature market when Canada, didn't really, have anything at the time other than a small medical system, and then some, cannabis LPs that were going public like Tweed. So then, from that, our company got bought by a much larger US MSO called Cresco Labs, which I'm sure you've probably heard of. So Cresco bought us, and then right around that time as well, Ontario was going to have their own cannabis retail stores. So I believe it was under the the Liberal government before Ford came into power in Ontario. It was going to be the OCS, Ontario
government
Cannabis
owned.
Store. Similar to the the liquor store LCBO in Ontario. So that was the plan, and then Ford came into power and changed it to a lottery-based system. So it was a lottery-based system, 25 winners. Anyone could apply. So the company I worked with, we ended up, coming to a deal with one of the first round lottery winners. So I went through the, licensing process with the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario fairly early compared to, there's only 25 of us, right? So, at the very beginning, I learned a lot from that. And then just generally speaking, like my background is, like a mile wide and inch deep. Like I know a lot about business, but nothing, I'm not an expert, I'd say, in anything. So, going through that lottery process, working with the winner, I learned a lot about, retail, the licensing process, et cetera. So then there was a second lottery, and then with 50 winners. And then after that, the government announced it was going to open up to a first come, first serve process. So at that point in time, I realized, I think I can, probably do this. I see a lot of people that, I think are way less advanced than me, opening up stores and, doing fairly well. So I was like, you know what, I'll give this a try. Worst case, I'll, lose a little bit of money on the application process. So I formed a company. I ended up raising about $1 million through another public company. I opened up 4 of the first, I'd say 150 stores in the province. So I live in Toronto. And, I obviously saw what happened in Alberta with, saturation of stores when the market opened up, and then even just other states, in the US where everyone rushes to the major cities and, the rent is insane and it's just everyone's trying to outbid each other. So I was like, you know what, I only have $1 million. I'd rather, find the lowest hanging fruit. So I decided to start opening up stores in, towns that weren't as, I guess, attractive as the major cities. So the first 4 stores I opened them up very quick, fairly cheap. It was a, big learning curve, hiring, training, retaining employees fairly early on. This is during COVID as well. So it was, obviously fast changing landscape with,
every day, every week. Yeah.
Like
new rule every week.
Allowed in stores, not allowed in stores, curbside pickup, etc. So it was an interesting time. The 4 stores did well. They, hit a run rate of close to 15 million, only after a few months of being open. So from that, I ended up selling my ownership back to the public company. So they bought my ownership. I left my corporate job and decided I wanted to open up a new chain of stores. So that brings us, to what the meat of what we wanted to talk about today is my current business, Cannabis Express. Right after it was sold, started Cannabis Express with a new idea, new concept. I saw the changing landscape in the retail industry, both in Ontario and just generally. So I thought I could do it a lot better than most people.
Well, let's talk about a couple of things. You put a pretty big swath of information to us there. Let's talk about as you reflected on your early experiences. Let's talk about California a little bit, because I think there's we always look south to the different states that went legal first, and California. Would you agree, or you would be better informed than me that their success has been, what do we call it, muted? Like, I think there's a lot of optimism around New York State becoming the biggest, but I saw wins and losses in California. What kind of lessons did you take away from your experience in California, both positive and not negative, but kind of things to watch out for? How did you reflecting on that period? What do you think?
Well, I'd say, even looking at a lot of the large multi-state operators, like a lot of them are not going into California just because of how difficult it is now. Obviously, it was a few years ago when I was doing more work there, so it's different than today. But I think even today, it's much more difficult for a legal operator than it was before. Obviously, due to the rise of inflation, energy costs, competitiveness from the illicit market, and the taxes.
Talk about that. I mean, and talk about for those for those listening who maybe aren't steeped in the ins and outs of the cannabis business, particularly in the U.S. What is it about the California market that is most vexing to the retail?
Honestly, it's the taxes. It all comes down to the taxes. Like they're taxed heavily. And then obviously there's other issues that they have to deal with, like banking. Banking's challenging since it's still federally illegal. But I'd say the banking and the taxation are both challenging. And then obviously you're competing against illicit sellers who obviously aren't paying any taxes, aren't licensed, and their margins are a lot higher. So that's a big challenge. But I think on a positive note, what I learned from California was more about the brands, the product makeup, the differentiation between stores, the layout, how they look, how they feel. And then even just looking at, the category assortment of, where products are trending, right? Like there's a lot of brands from the US that have entered Canada, that are trying to sell their products here. But just seeing obviously out there, it's different than it is here. Brands can, do more marketing, advertising. Here in Canada, Ontario, it's a lot more.
It doesn't seem to be helping. I guess where I'm getting with this, I don't know where I'm getting, so to speak, but where you're taking me with this is, all that being the case, that it is easier to do, as you described, the marketing environment's very different. And you've also got different rules on content. They still struggle, right? So it's not just a matter of the product and the marketing. There's some fundamental issues. Even the municipalities. I mean, I know many municipalities in California decided not to allow cannabis. So it's very complex, right?
Yeah, similar to here in Ontario, there's large municipalities that have opted out, like, Mississauga, Oakville, Caledon, and a lot of smaller municipalities. But, obviously New York, the rules and regulations are, fairly similar to how it is in Canada. Obviously, it took them longer to get started, and they have a, much more robust social equity program, which is great. But yeah, I think people are a lot more excited about New York than California, just because, in California, there's, obviously a lot more outdoor and, space to grow cannabis illegally versus New York. So obviously, are hoping that the legal market is a lot larger in New York than California.
Yeah, I mean, just by population, it's pretty exciting. Anyway, enough about that. Let's talk about the new concept. So take me from the kind of the whiteboard. You distilled all your experience down into a new retail concept. Take me through Cannabis Express.
Yeah, so the concept of Cannabis Express came when, just from seeing, from my past experience and, growing up and how people actually purchase cannabis, as well as, me opening up those early on stores and then selling it. I realized that, number one, it doesn't make sense for me to compete in large cities. There are people that are much more well capitalized and, they have the ability to sustain significant losses, and I obviously, can't. So looking at, I knew I needed to open up stores in towns that are either, they have no stores or the competition is low. So that was the first thing. The second thing is obviously controlling costs. I think a lot of people, went at the very beginning to build these gigantic 2,000 plus square feet, fancy Apple stores that they always talk about, which, that's not sustainable at all. I think there's obviously a time and a place for, specialized, retail like that. But for cannabis, it's unnecessary. But yeah, people here just built these big stores, took too long to build them, overspent. And I obviously wanted to go the opposite route. And then the next thing is, a lot of stores have 500, 600, 700, 800,000 items in store, which is obviously, for me, it's just way too many. The selection's too big. Even looking at, some competitor stores, like 80% of their sales are from 20% of their products. So it doesn't make any sense to have that many items. So, number one, I wanted to find small locations as well, just to, smaller the location. Obviously, the utility cost is lower, the build out's lower, rent, insurance, etc. So small locations, small to medium sized towns. And
what's your average square foot for your store? Like I see,
it's less than 1,000. I'd say the average is probably around like 700. But keeping in mind, like some of the small towns I'm in, it's obviously tough to find tiny locations, but the rent ends up being super cheap. Like I'd say our average rent cost is around like $1,000 for 13 stores. So we have 13 store locations right now in Ontario.
13. What? Tell me, and I was looking on your site. I'll put a link into the show notes. But take me through some of the cities, because as you say, you're staying out. There's a bunch in Brampton, which is probably the biggest city you're in. But take me through the assortment.
Yeah, exactly. So we opened up a store every 6 weeks, pretty much for the last year and a half. So
Wicked.
We have 2 stores in Brampton.
That's wild. How are you still standing, my friend?
It's you have to love it. That's for sure. You definitely have to love it. Yeah. We have 2 in Brampton, Uxbridge, Hillsdale, Wasaga Beach, Port Hope, Ridgetown, Wingham, Beaton, Hampton, Scarborough, Pickering, and then we have one in a town called North Goyer, which is outside Ottawa. So 13 locations. We keep them very small. Like I'm pretty sure we also have the smallest cannabis stores in the country. So some of them are about 300 square feet with about 80 square feet of retail space. So just small locations. We optimize labor, so we only have one person working at a time. And limited.
There's a bit of risk with one person though. Like in the COVID era, we're still in the quasi post COVID era. One person gets sick. I mean, how do you deal with the? I just diving into the operational questions, but right there, you got me thinking.
Yeah, I'd say it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like we have about, I'd say 2.8 employees per store. So we have our team. It's, fairly lean, like limited corporate overhead. It honestly does get challenging when, one employee is sick and someone else, is on vacation, then, what do you do? But I think, part of our success is, from scaling. So obviously we have stores that are fairly close to each other. So, if you have one or two stores in opposite ends of the city, then it's tough to get staff to, cover a shift at a different location. But, the more stores you have, if they're grouped together in a certain way, then, it's been easier for us to have employees. And we've been lucky to have, dedicated employees who are able to, trek out to a store that they don't usually work at. So that's been helpful for us. But at the very beginning, 100%, it was challenging, when you only have a few stores and, someone calls in sick and the store has to be closed for a day, right? Which is,
or you're going for a drive to North Gower, which I'm from Ottawa, so I know it's a bit of a hike. All right. So clearly, you've made some decisions around assortment because, as you say, did you follow the 80-20 and how did you decide? Obviously, you have this experience. So walk me through your thinking around the assortment. I guess, broadly speaking, as I understand it, it is still the case that, flower is about 50% and the balance is taken up. But is that reflected in your assortment? And talk to me about how you think about that.
Yeah, so that is where our assortment is at. And then, going back to California, like obviously, the people are smoking less. And I think that's where we're trending towards. But obviously, flower right now is still the largest product category. Our mix of, how many products in each category is reflective of, most general market statistics for Canada or Ontario, where it's, mostly flower, then you have pre-rolls, vapes, edibles, concentrates, beverages.
How are beverages doing for you? What do you think?
Beverages are doing well. I think, obviously, talking about regulations a little bit, I think the
10% rule,
the 10 milligrams per package is obviously challenging for us because the price is fairly high for each drink or for each gummy. But personally, like I love the drinks. I think, they're the easiest or one of the easiest ways for a new customer to, get into testing out cannabis. Like a lot of people don't want to smoke. So having a drink is fairly easy. So they do well, but obviously it's still, such a small percentage of the overall market.
Yeah, right on. So we've talked about assortment. Now let's turn the lens around 180 degrees. Walk me through the store as if I'm a customer. What's the experience?
So if you walk in, usually, so part of the regulations, you're not supposed to see anything when you walk into a store. So we usually have, a little wall or something blocking the view. So you walk in, if you're, you look underage, you get your ID checked, you come around the corner. We have, limited amount of obviously space, but it, makes it a lot easier for us because customers are directed, towards the front of where they want to go. So I would imagine if you walk into a fast food restaurant where you go up to the front, you have menu boards behind the counter, with all the assortment of what's being sold, and then someone behind a desk or behind a counter with a register in front of them. That's pretty much how all the stores look. We have two big menu boards with all of our products shown on them. We have a few display cases that only carry like accessories, bongs, lighters, vape pens, or vape pen batteries, rolling papers, etc. And then we have some displays where we, advertise, whatever's on sale that week. But then pretty much you just walk up to the counter, talk to the person who's there, put in your order, and then that person, turns around and all of the products are behind them. So we design the stores in a way where, it's very fast for the staff member to, grab an item and then give it to the customer.
Can be run by one. It's smart, kind of be run by one individual. They're not disappearing out back and leaving people alone in the, to their own in the store. It's very smart.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes it easier for, doing things like inventory counts, finding discrepancies, things like that. Even product training, like having 120 items allows us to make sure each staff member is trained on, every single product that we sell. So some stores I go to personally, it's, there's no way each staff member knows about 1,000 items. So keeping the product assortment limited, allows for staff to actually be knowledgeable about all the products, which makes it the customer experience a lot better as well.
So I often have discussions with retail cannabis leaders about cannabis years that feel very compressed. But when you pull back the lens, it's really a very young industry, super young. And so right now there's some consolidation happening in the marketplace. What's your view of both the real estate that is being consolidated and we seem to have made good progress. I mean, we're in better than 50% or close to it of illicit market, but what's your perspective as you see it today? Are you gearing up for more expansion, more opportunities, or how are you looking at it from your lens
Yeah,
today?
I'm continuing to expand. I think what sets us apart from, most retailers is, if you follow a lot of them, not many people are expanding anymore. We're actually in a decline in Ontario of more store closures than openings, which is
Some consolidation too, yeah. Yes.
Yeah, which I think is beneficial when Toronto has hundreds of stores, which doesn't make a lot of sense. But there is some consolidation, but it's obviously challenging because I think most stores, even me, like I get pitched on a daily basis for retail stores that are for sale, and all of them are just in such a big hole. Their rent is too much, their labor cost, they're losing money month over month. So most of the attractive, well, there honestly isn't many attractive, cannabis retail opportunities right now, just because of how much money a lot of people are losing. But for us, our plan is just continue to grow, and then obviously, if the right offer comes along to for someone to buy us, then we'll definitely entertain it. But our company has been profitable after 8 months of opening up stores, which is like I don't know who else you've spoken to. I know you've had other guests on the show, but in terms of retail store profitability, I haven't found anyone who's more profitable on a percentage basis than us.
So you described growing your stores in Ontario. So a couple of follow-up questions. First of all, are you looking beyond Ontario? You're in Ontario. You've got your expertise here in the province, which is its own thing. Other provinces go to market in different ways. And then what's your, let's talk about Ontario. What needs to happen in Ontario for the market to realize its potential?
Yeah, I've looked at other provinces. Obviously, Quebec, we can't open up stores. Alberta is way too saturated. Manitoba's close by, but they still have a high amount of stores. So I think right now, for most people, the biggest opportunity is in Ontario. I still think there's a lot of, small towns and areas that will eventually opt in, which, would make good locations for stores. And then obviously our team is very small. So, I'm wearing 1,000 hats right now. And for me to open up stores in another province, I don't really think makes a lot of sense for us. I think, we're better off just opening up stores in Ontario. I do get pitched sometimes about expanding, out to BC, but I would really have to, have a clone of myself to, be successful out there. So right now the focus is just in Ontario, but I am keeping a close eye on other provinces as they, as things change to see if there's an opportunity. But right now, the focus is just here.
And thinking about Ontario, it's got its own quirks. What do you think it will take for Ontario to be succtersuccessful?
I think it's probably more
successful. I guess we could say more successful.
Yeah, I think it's similar to what probably other guests have said. And in terms of regulations, I think for brands to be able to advertise and market to customers is very challenging, which is better for me as a retailer, because obviously we have a lot of power because we're the one in the age gated store, which we actually speak to customers. So that's been beneficial. But I think the regulations need to change in terms of the milligrams, the caps on edibles. That needs to change, as well as the taxation. The taxes, the excise tax is extremely high for a lot of people, so a lot of producers are losing a lot of money.
Now those two things you're describing mostly are federal issues. What do you think about just the provincial issues?
I think it would be nicer. Obviously, this happened in BC recently, where the provincial distributor allowed licensed producers to sell directly to retailers. But in BC, it was a little bit different because they had a strike out there with the one of the unions. So they temporarily, I believe, allowed that. In Ontario, it would be, I think, a lot more efficient if the producers could sell directly to, the retail stores. Like, I think right now, I'm at a point where if we were able to buy products in bulk and get a discount, I think that would, be very beneficial to us, because how the current market is set up, if you have, one store or 100 stores, everyone's paying the same price for every product. So I think, it's beneficial if you're under 5 stores, it's great because, you're paying the same amount as someone with, many stores. But as you grow, it becomes painful when you're paying the same price.
Let's talk about product for a while. So for the first time, House of Flowers came to Toronto this week. Actually, we're talking here on the Friday, the 16th. So tell me about the show. What did you see that was exciting? Off mic, you were saying you were at the show, and And so that put a ding in your voice. You're a real trooper to come continue jump on the podcast. But talk about what excited you that you saw at that show and in general about product.
Yeah, so Hall of Flowers, they had a 2-day show in Toronto this week, which was fun. They primarily have shows in California, Santa Rosa, Palm Springs. So it was nice that they expanded over to here. It was great. I think it was nice to for me as a retailer. So a bunch of my staff came as well, but it was nice to see obviously a lot of people in person. Like I'm either behind the desk at home or on the road driving from town to town. So
sure,
I think it's always nice when you have a group of people that get together in one spot and you can speak to people face to face that you've talked to for months. So that was really beneficial in terms of, I guess, like product innovation or new things coming out. I don't really think there was a lot of that. Obviously brands are coming out with new products on a monthly basis, but there was nothing that really, I'd say, caught my eye in particular. I think the best value for me as a retailer out of attending that show and for my staff to be there was just, the interactions of, seeing people face to face with the brands that we currently work with. And then just, talking to brands that we don't sell in store to see potentially if we could, get them in store.
Well, yeah. And you've got a very curated assortment. So I guess it's a show that you're very picky about and fussy about the products. It's really got to jump out. But it's, as you said, it's always a great opportunity. Let's last couple of questions. Let's take a change of course here. Let's talk about people. So lots of retailers struggling to find people. We've talked about it a couple of times. I think the cannabis industry was a net beneficiary of a lot of people who left the food service industry because how did you staff thousands of stores? But today, if you take me to today, how hard is it to find people, and then how hard is it to find the right people, and how hard is it to keep them? Or what's your secret sauce?
So yeah, no, you're 100% right. I think this isn't just a cannabis ongoing challenge. I think it's general for retail, hospitality, and the broader market. But yeah, no, finding people is challenging. Like I think our longest employees, the longest people we've had at all of the stores have been in the smaller towns. So for us, it's a lot easier to get people in, smaller towns to, stay at the store. But obviously the talent pool is a lot smaller. Like if, we're in towns of 2,000 people. So, we may get like 20, 30 applicants max versus, in a town like Brampton, there's, over 1 million people and we'll get, hundreds of resumes. So I think in the smaller towns, our retention is a lot better, which has been, beneficial to us. But no, it is challenging, especially like, working at a cannabis store. It is a tough job, tougher than, what a lot of people think. And, they really have to love the industry and be passionate about it. But yeah, we're doing things to, make sure we retain employees. Like we do a lot of promotion from within. So we have like a lot of our early on employees they're in more managerial positions where, they're in charge of supply chain or they work with all the brands. But we're also lucky to bring on a really strong general manager who oversees all stores. So she's been great, and her background wasn't in cannabis at all, which has been fantastic. I don't really think you need cannabis experience to be successful in cannabis retail. It's, if you can sell a t-shirt, you can, sell a, half quarter jar of weed. But yeah, it definitely is challenging. It definitely is challenging. Obviously, you look at numbers. I believe Headset came out with some figures, a month or two ago, saying like 60% of staff that you hire are gone within 3 months, and that most of those statistics are true. But obviously, I think it's true for retail in general, not just cannabis.
Yeah. I made that point to the media. It's like, listen, some people would be very happy to have those numbers. I mean, listen, turnover is a thing. And it's I talk to retailers every day of all formats who put a big focus on retention, and they're experiencing tremendous turnover. So yeah, for sure, it's not limited or restricted to the size of the business or the industry. It's a very dynamic time. Last question for you, for all the listeners, for your fellow retailers, for your fellow cannabis retailers listening. Advice: 2 starts, 1 stop, based on all of your experience and what you do today. 2 things they should start doing. If they're not, 1 thing maybe they should do less of, and maybe you find isn't working anymore.
Well, 2 things they should start doing. I think, number 1 is just making sure that, they're all of their costs are as low as possible. Like, I aggressively negotiate every single service provider agreement to, make sure I'm paying the least amount. And obviously, as you scale, you have more negotiating power. So just making sure, every service provider agreement is, every month you're renegotiating it. Every time you open up a store, you're renegotiating it. So, being aggressive with that, I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing I would say is just trying to bring in revenue from sources outside of actually selling product. So recently, the AGCO, the Alcohol and Gaming Commission of Ontario, they are allowing retailers to enter into data agreements with licensed producers where we can sell our data. So I would say just, making sure that you are trying to monetize everything in the store, not just selling products, not just selling accessories, but, selling data and working with the right producers to sell that data to. Because the margins are already razor thin in cannabis. So just, making sure you're, spending less and bringing in more money, those two things. And then, the stop that you mentioned, I would say I do know a lot of retailers that are just losing, hundreds of thousands of dollars a month on, like failing stores. I'd say just give up on those stores. I think it's crazy. The people in Canada, I know, people are, getting second mortgages, refinancing, their house to pay for these loser stores. And I don't think that makes a lot of sense. I think if you have a business that's, failing, I think a lot of people are very emotionally connected to it. But I would, it's obviously easier said than done, but just removing the emotion from it. And from a purely financial point of view, just, if the store is not making money and there's no clear path to profitability, then just, cutting your losses and moving on.
Well, Chris, it's been a real treat getting to know you and getting to know your business. Congratulations on your success, and I wish you continued success in this business. Now, if people want to get in touch with you, you're a LinkedIn guy, and I'll put a link into the show notes for the store, but is a LinkedIn a great way to connect with you?
Oh, anything. LinkedIn, email on our website, www.cannabisexpress.com. So there's no E, just XPRESS. You can send an email to the general inbox. It'll get flipped over to me. But yeah, LinkedIn, email, any way possible. And I'm always happy to give advice to, retailers or people who are, thinking about opening up retail stores. Happy to, give my 2 cents and help out. So yeah, if anyone wants to reach out, glad to talk.
All right. Well, fantastic. Well, listen, thanks again for joining me on The Voice of Retail. And like I said, wish you much continued success and a great rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. I enjoyed it.
Thanks for tuning into this special episode of The Voice of Retail. If you haven't already, be sure and click and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform so new episodes will land automatically twice a week. And check out my other retail industry media properties, the Remarkable Retail Podcast, Conversations with Commerce Next Podcast, and the Food Professor Podcast with Dr. Sylvain Charlevoix. Last but not least, if you're into barbecue, check out my all-new YouTube barbecue show, Last Request Barbecue, with new episodes each and every week. I'm your host, Michael LeBlanc, president of M.E. LeBlanc Company and Maven Media. And if you're looking for more content or want to chat, follow me on LinkedIn or visit my website at meleblanc.co. Have a safe week, everyone.